Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Of course, as always, I am your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman. And today, in our second to last episode, I'll repeat that again, our second to last episode before postseason play, starting with the play-in tournament on the 16th this month, we have an absolute jam-packed episode. We've got a major player from the Eastern Conference coming back from injury. We have a major player in the Eastern Conference who is sitting out the rest of the season due to an injury. We've got a coach who resigned. We've got Hall of Fame inductees. We've got a legendary player retiring. We've got huge games that will have major seeding implications. And we have a team that has been slipping all season, and they're slipping again at the wrong time right before postseason play. So without further ado, folks, without any other hesitation or delays, let's get right into it. First, let's start with that player in the Eastern Conference who is coming back from injury and who will be a major factor in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. That player was your MVP last year, and it is Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is coming back for the 76ers. He came back for the 76ers, winning 2 games in a row for them, huge games for them at home against the Oklahoma City Thunder. They were without Shea, so not a little asterisk on that win. Then they go into Miami and probably what was a must-win game for Philadelphia if they wanted any hopes of avoiding the play-in tournament, and they got that done tonight as I am filming this. So that was a great win for the Philadelphia 76ers. So they are coming back to form now. Embiid is healthy. Maxey is healthy. Harris is a little bit injured. He'll miss a few games, but he'll eventually come back. Kelly Oubre is playing out of his mind. Lowry hasn't been that bad for Philadelphia. The pieces are starting to fit together for this Philadelphia team, and they are looking in the past 2 games like the team that we saw when Embiid was on the court for Philadelphia, when the Philadelphia 76ers were the 2 seed this season, and they are looking back to that, and they have the easiest schedule left in the NBA, and they look to take advantage of that and try to get to that 6th seed and potentially even more if they can run the table. So the question is, with Joel Embiid being back, are the Philadelphia 76ers still contenders in the Eastern Conference? From what they did tonight against Miami, going into Miami, getting a huge road win there, I'm going to say yes. Honestly, this question probably was dictated by that game tonight against Miami, or when you guys are watching this, the game yesterday against Miami, because that would have put, if Philadelphia lost, them in the 8th seed, probably behind Indiana, who would have been the 7th seed by 2.5 games. Now Philadelphia's in only half game behind Miami, where the series is tied 2-2, and the tiebreaker is yet to be determined because those two are pretty similar in conference record. So it gets very, very interesting here for both Miami, Philadelphia, but we'll get into Miami a little bit later in the show today. But Philadelphia is definitely a contender after what I saw from them against Miami tonight. They absolutely killed it. Joel Embiid looked like he wasn't injured. He was on a minutes restriction, which is expected, obviously, coming back from an injury, missing a lot of games. He played out of his mind, scoring 29 points in a huge, huge performance, and they needed every single one of those points to get the win today. Tyrese Maxey also had an amazing game. Those two together on the court look absolutely lethal, and when they play, they look absolutely unguardable, and it is very, very, very tough to stop that team. And especially if Philadelphia, maybe they don't get back to that 7 slot. Maybe they stay at that 7 slot. Maybe they're at the 8 slot. If they win that first playing game, they're playing the Milwaukee Bucks, and we're going to get into them a little bit later as well in the show, but not to get a little bit of a sneak preview here, but Milwaukee has been struggling mightily with some brutal losses. And if Philadelphia plays Milwaukee, I think Philadelphia would have a decent chance in that series. If Philadelphia gets out of the gets to the 6th seed, you've got Cleveland, you've got Orlando, New York, all on the table to play Philadelphia. Honestly, in all of those series, from what the Knicks have endured this season with health issues, Cleveland, we don't trust in the postseason, and the Magic we really haven't seen in the postseason. Philadelphia should absolutely be favored in one of those series. So Philadelphia is still in this race, could still arguably get to the conference finals, and I would not be surprised if they do so. And this lineup this season, I don't know if DeAnthony Melton's getting back. I forgot about him. He's been a little bit injured, and he looks to be out for a little bit more, but he could come back. But with the lineup of Maxey, DeAnthony Melton, Tobias Harris, Nicholas Batum, and Joel Embiid, they are an astounding plus 1 63 together in the limited time that they played, which absolutely off the charts for Philadelphia. So if Philadelphia can get healthy, play good at the right time, take advantage of this easy schedule, because I'm going to go now show you their schedule. Philadelphia in these last couple of games, they've got the Grizzlies, the Spurs, the Pistons, the Magic, and the Nets. Their hardest game there is against the Magic, but that game is at home. The Magic, other than that, those are all winnable games for Philadelphia. And pretty much all of them they're going to be favorites in. So it wouldn't be a surprise if Philadelphia ran the table, and that would put pressure on a team like Miami, a team like Indiana, to have to go 4-1, to have to go 5-1 to end the regular season. So that puts a lot of pressure there. So Philadelphia in a very, very good position to potentially move up out of the play-in tournament to where they end up playing, getting themselves to the 6th seed, playing one of those 3 teams that I mentioned. But also, they still may not get there because Miami also has an easy schedule. Indiana still has a game and a half advantage over Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me, that's a game advantage over Philadelphia. So it's, as I said, it's possible that they don't get there. But at the end of the day, this Philly team in these past 2 games, from what I've seen from Joel Embiid, from what I've seen from Tyrese Maxey, from what I've seen from the role players, they have absolutely looked incredible. And heck, even in a series against Boston, like that would be absolutely hilarious. Philadelphia somehow loses their playing game. Maybe they play Miami again. They lose that one. They play Boston. Boston's reward for being the best record in the league, cruising past the Eastern Conference, having a bigger lead against the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference than the 1 seed in the West has against the 10 seed. So what I'm getting to here is Boston has absolutely cruised through the season, and their reward for getting the 1 seed could potentially be playing a Joel Embiid full strength, healthy Philadelphia 76ers team. Boston would not be happy about that. And that would be an intriguing matchup to watch. Obviously, I would pick Boston in that series, but that could potentially be a challenge for Boston. And Philadelphia, if Boston struggles in the playoffs like we've seen before, could potentially win that series. I'm not saying they are, and I'm saying it's not likely from the way Boston's been playing this season, but Philadelphia is back. And I'm convinced, because from what I've seen with Philadelphia, with Embiid this season, you've got to remember, they were the 2nd seed with Embiid this season. Without Harden, this same team that they have right now was the 2 seed, and Philadelphia has absolutely showed out these past 2 games and are reminding the Eastern Conference, reminding the rest of the league that they are a threat, not a potential threat, a threat to win this championship this season. And honestly, anything's possible in the Eastern Conference, because as I said, with the 3 teams, you've got Orlando, who we've never seen the playoff, Cleveland up and down this year. You've got Milwaukee's, they have their issues this season. The Knicks haven't been healthy this season. You've got Boston, who we've seen choke in the playoffs before. We've got Miami, who's been up and down this season. You've got Indiana, who's been up and down the season, not really a team that we expect to do a lot in the playoffs. So the East is wide open. The path to the conference finals is wide open, and it is going to be very critical, as we are going to discuss later, for these 3 teams, Philadelphia, Miami, Indiana, to get that 6th seed, because that 6th seed could potentially lead you to a path, as I said, of one of those 3 teams with Cleveland, Orlando, and New York. And then the second round matchup against a Milwaukee Bucks team who's been struggling mightily. So if the 6th seed will be very crucial, we'll get into a little bit more on that later in the show. But for right now, from what I've seen from Philadelphia and Joel Embiid playing like this on a minutes restriction, again, Joel Embiid scored 29 today on a minute restriction. He was absolutely blazing on a minutes restriction. I think he only played like 30 minutes, maybe yet 30 minutes today for Embiid, 33 minutes today for Embiid. Got 4 minutes more than the OKC game where he got 29 minutes. But really for Philadelphia, on a minutes restriction, Embiid's going to be playing 40 minutes in the postseason. So imagine when Embiid ramps up, imagine what full strength Embiid is. Honestly, I'm just absolutely shocked the way Embiid has played the last 2 games, because for being out that long, for 2.5 months since January, it's for most players, it takes time when you get back on the court. It takes time to ramp up. But Joel Embiid is just all of a sudden like snap. He's back. He's doing what he was doing. He's playing like an MVP. And if he does play like that, watch out for this Philadelphia team, because remember, they got Buddy Hield at the deadline as well. He's a shooter who can provide them a punch off the bench. They've got Kyle Lowry, as I said, on the waiver wires. He is an experienced veteran for this team and can provide good leadership and is a decent asset on or starting or off the bench for this team. Again, they have players who have proven themselves in the playoffs, like a Kyle Lowry. We've seen it from even Cameron Payne off the bench. He played very good with Phoenix last year. Cameron Payne could provide a spark. The Philadelphia is looking really good right now, and if they do take advantage of the schedule, they will be a major, major threat. So good job for Philadelphia. I expect them to be in this race for the 6th seed going down the stretch, and we'll probably end up talking about them in the next week as we get into our last week of the regular season. But I want to move on to a coaching change that will happen. It happened today, but technically not happening until the end of the season. Hornets head coach Steve Clifford is resigning after this season. He is expected to move to a front office role. This was his second stint with Charlotte, but this time only getting 2 seasons with the Hornets after they fired James Borrego. The owners, Gabe Plockton and Rick Chanel, were open to bringing Clifford back, but Clifford ultimately did not want to coach this team. So he will probably move into the front office. That's what reports say. Clifford, in his second stint in Charlotte, was 45 and 112 with a 28.5 winning percentage. And among the league's assistant coaching candidates expected to be considered for this position is Sacramento's Jordi Fernandez, Boston's Charles Lee, Miami's Chris Quinn, Phoenix's Kevin Young, among with other assistant coaches around the league. Ultimately, Steve Clifford, when he got hired for this Hornets coach, I really didn't think his demeanor fitted this team. I was a little surprised that they brought Clifford back in the first place, especially after being fired. But, that was Charlotte's decision. I thought ultimately Charlotte needed a much younger voice to lead that team because it's a young team. They're building around younger players like LaMelo Ball, like Brandon Miller. And I thought they could use a younger voice to help lead that team, not necessarily a veteran coach with all these X's and O's kind of coach. I just think they needed a coach to let the young guys work, let the young guys develop, let them be free, manage them, but still let them be free roaming the court, running the offense a little bit less loose than what Steve Clifford's offense had the Hornets do. I also think part of why this experiment didn't really work out with LaMelo Ball so far is that Terry Rozier was taking up a lot of that space. He's gone. Miles Caliubre gone. PJ Washington taking up a lot of opportunities gone. So I think Charlotte is moving in the right direction. We talked about this a little bit last episode. As I said, I think they had a pretty solid trade deadline, getting draft capital, getting young guards, getting young players to build around this roster, and expiring contracts to free up more cap room. Obviously, the team's going to be revolved around Brandon Miller, but looking at that list of assistant coaches again that are in consideration, Sacramento's Jordi Fernandez, he's been absolutely incredible for Sacramento, along with being next to Mike Brown. He has been an up-and-coming rising assistant coach. Charles Lee for Boston, he was with Budenholzer's staff, joined Joe Mazzulla's staff this season after Budenholzer got fired. He's been a very solid leader and a very solid voice for Milwaukee and Boston in these past couple of years. Miami's Chris Quinn, he's been one of those developmental guys for Spo. He's been a pretty crucial assistant coach for them, and he could bring potentially in that culture, that energy that is instilled in Miami to Charlotte. I probably prefer him as one of the top options. And then Phoenix's Kevin Young, he's been a nice voice for Phoenix. He's a very, very good coach for the Phoenix Suns. He provides a lot of energy for them. Very smart, very intelligent mind there. So honestly, any of those options for the Charlotte Hornets wouldn't be that bad of a choice. Obviously, we don't know who's going to turn out to be great or not, but those assistant coaches are the kind of guys that I'm talking about for Charlotte, who are sort of younger guys who are ready to instill their energy, their youth, the energy to the young team that Charlotte has, bringing the energy, trying something new, not necessarily X's and O's every single time, letting LaMelo, letting Brandon Miller roam a little bit free. And I think for looking back at the young coaches who have been hired on rebuilding teams, number one prime example of that was Mark Danluth. That pretty much worked out for Charlotte. Not Charlotte, Oklahoma City, OKC. That's absolutely worked out. As we can see, OKC is at the top of the Western Conference. Will Hardy, even for the Utah Jazz, hasn't been that bad of an hire either. For the Utah Jazz. Even though they haven't been winning a lot, I still think he's done an okay job with the Utah Jazz. Honestly, I think those two young coaches are just prime examples of what you can get out of a young head coach, what they can instill on a young rebuilding team, that energy, that pace, that freeness to the young players. And I think that will be essential to LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, especially for their developments. And then also you've got picks in the draft. Charlotte, they can get another guy. They can get another guy, potentially power forward, shooting guard there. They have Mark Williams, who I like, the second-year guy from Duke, pretty much injured all of this season, but showed a lot of flashes, especially last season for Charlotte. I think he's a nice addition to their young core. I think Charlotte, with their draft capital, is looking at a very bright future. So I think for the state of this franchise, I think it's honestly probably best for the sides to not part ways from the head coaching position, because I really do think that a older kind of coach, a more X's and O kind of coach, aggressive, demanding Steve Clifford, and don't get me wrong, I think he's a decent coach, but I just don't think he's a right fit for a young and rebuilding Charlotte Hornets team. So I think this will ultimately end up being a decent move for the Charlotte Hornets. Again, I said this last episode, they got to use their draft pick good. They really got to hit on this draft pick. That this year will be very, very crucial for Charlotte, or else we're going to start getting questions on this rebuild and what is going on there in Charlotte, because they don't want a scenario like Detroit or like Brooklyn where they really screw themselves over. So I think they really need to hit on that. But other than that, Charlotte is moving in the right direction. I think they will find that young voice. I think these new owners want to instill new energy into the Charlotte team. And so far, what they've done, I think they've executed that, and they've showed signs that they're moving in the right direction, and it will stay that way, I believe. And I think Charlotte in a couple of years will be back in the mix, but they really got to hit on their draft picks. And I mean, that's how you got to do it in a rebuilding situation. But let's move on to Julius Randle. Julius Randle has been ruled out for the season for the New York Knicks after a very, very unfortunate injury in late January against the Miami Heat at home, late in the game, up 17, trying to attack the basket, dislocates his shoulder. Julius Randle tried to fight back and try to come back for this Knicks playoff run, but ultimately he could not and will have to require getting season-ending surgery on that dislocated shoulder. This is an absolute brutal blow for the New York Knicks, as the New York Knicks, with Julius Randle healthy, especially in that month of January, were an astounding 12-2. They were really, really solid in the month of January, and it's just an unfortunate thing for New York, because this is the best the Knicks team has looked in, honestly, years, probably since 1999, when the New York Knicks won and made that playoff run as the 8th seed. That is the best that New York has looked ever since the Patrick Ewing days. Like, it's been that long for New York. They finally have this opportunity. They trade for OG Anunoby. They look very, very good with Randle, Anunoby, Brunson on the court. And all of a sudden, Randle's out, and that changes a lot for this New York Knicks team. It really changes the depth for this New York Knicks team, the perspective, the lineups that they have to go with. They potentially have to go with a little bit smaller lineups in the playoffs, which can be exposed. So this is a very, very desperate, brutal blow for New York. Randle, even though he's had some questionable performances in postseason play throughout his years with New York in 21 and 23, he's still a very incredible player for this Knicks team, putting up 21 points and 8 rebounds for this team. That's 21 points. Who are you going to get it from in the postseason? And New York really looked like, especially with the way that the teams have been playing in the East is wide open. They looked like they could potentially make a run for Boston's money in the conference finals, and they could have given Boston a real good fight in the conference finals. But right now, it's just absolutely changed the dynamic for this New York Knicks team. And they're 15-14 without Randle. They've played okay and still sitting at the 5 seed now at 44-31, 2-game cushion ahead of the 6 seed Indiana. So they should be okay with that. But ultimately, they really have been a little bit up and down without Julius Randle. It's really tough to find another scorer for this New York Knicks team, considering that this New York Knicks team is a defensive heavy team. This is a very, very tough situation because we know that the Knicks, incredible team on defense, but you're going to have to get the scoring from somewhere else. Obviously, we've seen Donte DiVincenzo have an absolute resurgence this season. Not resurgence, but like just a career year in general, having like 9 30-point games this season where he had like 1 in his career prior to the season. So Donte DiVincenzo has had the year of his life playing for New York and looking a little bit more than a role player, like an actual huge factor, one of the star players for New York this season. Deuce McBride or Miles McBride, after the Knicks moved on from Emmanuel quickly and RJ Barrett, has had an opportunity to become the backup point guard starting now because of the injuries. He's really been a surprise to, honestly, most of the league here. Miles McBride has all of a sudden came out from nowhere, the kid from West Virginia, and has been balling out from the three-point line from the defensive side of the ball. Really looks like a Tom Thibodeau player, and he's been absolutely working beautifully with the New York Knicks system. So he's been really, really good. But still, even with those two guys, it's very, very tough to replace Julius Randle scoring when your team is defensive centric and you need every single point you can get in a playoff series where opponent defense gets a little bit tighter, it's a little bit harder to score. And potentially, if the Knicks were to end up playing a team like the Pacers, who have a very high offensive efficiency, or a Boston in the second round, those two matchups could potentially be very tough for this New York Knicks team if they have trouble scoring, because for how good their defense is, those two teams are just so good at scoring the ball. So it's very, very, it's just a brutal, brutal blow for a New York Knicks team. Hopefully, OG Anunoby can get back on the court before the end of the regular season, because he has to ramp up before the playoffs, because he just can't come back in right at the playoffs and say, I'm 100%. He's got to ramp up. So OG Anunoby's got to find a way to get back in these last 2 weeks for the New York Knicks, or else this will be a very serious problem and a very serious concern for the New York Knicks, potentially going to be a first-round exit for this Knicks team. And their starting lineup right now is McBride, Brunson, Josh Hart, Donte DiVincenzo, and Hartenstein, Mitchell Robinson. That's a very small team. And potentially, if they play a team that's a little bit bigger, like a Milwaukee Bucks, that's going to be a tough matchup for them, because they don't have the size, and they do have the physicality, but they do not have the size to match up with Milwaukee. When you got Brook Lopez and Giannis in the paint, attacking the paint, you really don't have anybody to guard them. You have one person to guard one of them, but who's guarding the other one? That's a very tough matchup. I know Brook's a little bit more of a perimeter-centric kind of a guy, but we know Brook Lopez is capable of scoring inside the paint. So that could be a very tough matchup for the Knicks if they don't get OG Anunoby and they have to start the smaller lineup, because OG Anunoby, I'm just using the Bucks as an example here, playing against the Milwaukee Bucks, he would be a perfect matchup against Giannis, where you put Hartenstein or Mitchell Robinson against Brook Lopez. Now you've got OG against Giannis, and you feel a lot more comfortable with that, and potentially that series, the dynamic of that series, who's favored in that series and who is expected to win that series can just change by the presence of OG Anunoby. We're not even talking about the offensive side of the ball here, because he is still an 18-point per game scorer. We're just talking about here on the defensive side of the ball for the New York Knicks. OG Anunoby is a huge factor for them when guarding a forward in the postseason. Let's say you play Miami in the first round. OG Anunoby could be there to guard a player like Jimmy Butler, who's played very well in the playoffs. He could be there to guard a player like Paolo Banchero. He can be there to guard Cleveland's big guys. Same scenario like Milwaukee. They got Allen and Mobley. I know New York has played good against Cleveland, but they still got those two big guys. And if they're undersized, that could potentially be a mismatch there. OG Anunoby can guard either a Mobley or an Allen, and Hartenstein or Mitchell take the other. OG Anunoby is I think he's more important, even though Randle's out. I think for what the Knicks' aspirations are this season, I think ultimately OG Anunoby is just as important as Julius Randle here. So I think they really need to get him back. And they're a very gritty basketball team, don't get me wrong. And I really, honestly, even though I'm a Heat fan and I really don't like them, it's hard to root against them because they really haven't been relevant in 20 years. And now all of a sudden they're having the best season and Randle's out. OG Anunoby is out. Brunson, we haven't even talked about Brunson yet. Brunson playing like an MVP, playing like an all-NBA first team kind of a player, probably going to be on the second team, but you get the point. Brunson out of his mind this season. New York is on a peak, and it's just an absolute devastating blow for this franchise. And where do you go from here? Well, like when you're playing the small lineup, I don't know if Precious Achiuwa is going to have to find a way. Thibodeau's going to have to incorporate him in the starting lineup, but that may potentially have to be an option for the New York Knicks. You may have to look into playing Jericho Sims for the New York Knicks. Like, I'm being serious here. It's getting desperation time for the New York Knicks if OG Anunoby cannot come back in these last 2 weeks, because, as I said, even if he comes back to start the playoffs, you still have to ramp up. You have to ramp up after you come back from an injury, and that is not easy to do considering OG Anunoby has been out for months. It's not like he's going to be back like 100%. So Thibodeau's going to have to consider making some legitimate lineup changes going into postseason play. And I think if Thibodeau what he should do is probably what I said in starting Precious Achiuwa. And I think he should move Miles McBride to the bench for now to give that spark like Emmanuel quickly did for them off the bench, and have the lineup of Brunson, DiVincenzo, Hart, Precious Achiuwa, and Hartenstein, because eventually this small lineup's really not going to work out. I watched the Knicks play the Heat the other day. Hart's a great defender, but Butler and the Miami big guys were really exposing the New York Knicks the other night, and it really cost them at the end of the day in that game. So when we're looking at this, looking for the preparation of the playoffs for this New York Knicks team, it's just a very major concern. And if I'm Thibodeau, I got to start Precious Achiuwa. And also, if you're Tom Thibodeau, you got to stop running Josh Hart, stop running Deuce McBride on the floor, playing them over 42 minutes per game each night. You've got to save them for the playoffs a little bit. I know it's tough because they're a very injured team right now, but they have to somehow find a way to make other players work in their rotation, whether that's playing Achiuwa more minutes, finding ways to get Jericho Sims in the lineup. They signed Shake Milton, potentially try to get him a little bit more minutes, potentially try to play Alec Burks a little more. They've got to find ways to adjust and add more players to this rotation, because the New York Knicks, the way they're playing, the way this lineup is, especially with Thibodeau ramping the minutes for Hart and McBride, especially, that's going to wear them down on the defensive end, and they're going to be fatigued going into the playoffs. And in a 7-game series where it's a day off, then you're back again, a day off, then you're back again, in a very competitive, probably gritty and grindy series, especially if the New York Knicks are in that series, if they're playing Cleveland or Orlando, who are both defensive-centric teams, or Miami, who's a defensive-heavy team, those are going to be tough, gritty, and grindy series, and that is going to leave fatigue on the Knicks. So Thibodeau's got to find a way to switch up these rotations, find some rotation with one of the big guys, or Achua or Jericho Sims, that works. Because for right now, you've got to go with the assumption. Josh Hart said this the other day, and I absolutely love it. You have to go with the assumption that Randle and OG Anunoby are not going to be back for the New York Knicks. We know Randle's not, but Thibodeau has to do that adjustment as well. He has to go with the assumption that OG Anunoby is not coming back. He probably will, but for now, you have to go with the assumption he's not coming back, and you're going to have to find ways to adjust and find ways to get big man in this lineup, because if he does not, I think New York will get exposed in this playoffs, and I think he needs more players playing, because then I think they will be fatigued. I would not be surprised if this is the way it's going to go for New York. They get surprised in the first round by a team like Orlando, or maybe lose to Cleveland. Who knows? But Thibodeau needs to make adjustments, and it needs to start now if this New York Knicks team wants, quite frankly, a chance of getting out of the first round, not let alone the second round of the playoffs. So that's my take on the New York Knicks. Like, it's very rough for the Knicks, but Thibodeau has to make the adjustments. But let's go on to a more positive thing here. The Hall of Fame inductees have been announced for the 2024 Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. There are two major inductees here. Chauncey Billups and Vince Carter are your two inductees. Chauncey Billups in his career played 17 seasons, averaged 15 points in his career, 5.5 assists in his career, was a finals MVP in Detroit in 2004. Chauncey Billups was a major player for that Detroit Pistons team. The way he played in that final series, the way he played on defense against Kobe Bryant, the way he led that Pistons team on offense when they were a little bit stagnant at times. Very underrated player in his career. Now, obviously, the current head coach of the Blazers, not going well for him there, but let's stick to his playing career rather than his coaching career. He absolutely dominated the Lakers. He really dominated that series, and it was just a shock to the league. Just an absolute shock, and he's somebody that nobody expected to be, quite frankly, a superstar winning the finals MVP, but yet he did it. He proved a lot of doubters wrong in that 2004 series, and he really shocked the world. That's probably one of the most shocking finals outcomes that we've seen. Like, we all expected the Lakers to dominate that series. And then the Pistons end up being the ones who dominate that series purely through the defensive side of the ball. And it was an absolute beautiful sight to see, even though people don't like a lot of defense in the finals. Chauncey Billups in that Detroit Pistons team with Rasheed Wallace, Big Ben Wallace. It was absolutely something spectacular and something very unique that we haven't seen since then and since the 90s, a defensive-centric team. So Chauncey Billups, well-deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. Let's ignore his coaching career. He also played for Denver with Carmelo Anthony for a little bit, played with Brooklyn, Toronto. Played for not Brooklyn or Toronto, He played for Denver, Minnesota, the Pistons, and he ended his career with the Clippers. So Chauncey Billups, really amazing career there and well-deserved there. No complaints there. Another player, Vince Carter. It's over, ladies and gentlemen. It's over. One of the greatest dunkers of all time, Vince Carter, making the Hall of Fame, playing an astounding 22 seasons in his career, leading the New Jersey Nets to the finals twice in his playing career. But we all know he's about dunking, but his playing career still, I think people, especially in my generation, Gen Z, mostly know him as one, like, just an incredible dunker. But this man, absolute baller for a very, very, very long time. With the Raptors, absolute baller. We know what he did there for one of the greatest Raptors in the history of that. He played incredible with the New Jersey Nets, as I just said, leading them to finals appearances. He played pretty solid with Orlando after the New Jersey Nets. He played with Dallas, hit some huge shots in the postseason for them. The Grizzlies didn't play that bad with Memphis either. Vince Carter was pretty solid for a very long time, and that is very rare to see in the NBA. And the only player we're really seeing that with now, 20 seasons plus, is LeBron James. Other than that, we really haven't seen that quite often here in the league. So what Vince Carter did to stay that consistent with the injuries, with the regression in the later parts of his career, that's what I think was the most incredible. Just staying consistent and playing for that long was absolutely incredible, but well-deserved for Vince Carter. 16.7 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, and 3 assists per game. Vince Carter absolutely deserved to be in that Hall of Fame. It's relatively a weak class. Those are the two major significant players, Chauncey Billups and Vince Carter. Jerry West also got in for the third time, if I'm not mistaken, as a consultant, as a GM for the Grizzlies, the Lakers, and a consultant for the Clippers and the Warriors. He got in for a third time. That's the 3 that we know so far. Obviously, there will be more to come, but that is your 2024 Hall of Fame inductees for the players. But let's move on from that to somebody who I believe will be a future Hall of Famer in the long run, Rajon Rondo. He decided to call it quits this week as he retired after 16 seasons of being in the NBA. Rajon Rondo, he was huge for the Boston Celtics, played for like a million teams, played for Boston, Dallas, Sacramento, Chicago, the Lakers, the Cavs, the Clippers. I'm probably missing a team or two there because he played for that many teams. Rajon Rondo was one of the best passers we've ever seen in the NBA. One of the best. And I don't think he gets a lot of credit for that Boston Celtics 2008 title run, because obviously when we think of that run, we think of the big 3. We think of Paul Pierce, the truth. We think of KG, anything is possible. We think of Ray Allen, that big 3. But nobody really understood how big of a factor Rondo was. He was really setting those guys up to succeed from shooting from the perimeter, setting them up in the pick and roll. One of the best pick and roll guys out there to play with. And he was just also a dog on the defensive side of the ball as well. Rajon Rondo was just really, really, really solid. He also won a title with the Lakers in 2020 as well, being a starter there. Not necessarily the impact he had with Boston, but still played a major role in that Lakers title in the bubble in 2020, starting for them. Very good veteran, very good mentor. He tried to be an assistant at Kentucky. I don't think he's there anymore. But for what Rajon Rondo has done in his career, should be celebrated, and it's an absolute legend right there. I mean, I don't think people understand how good this man was. This man was a bad you-know-what. And it's honestly, it's a little bit sad because, like, when we see the Rajon Rondos start retiring, we see like Vince Carter and get elected to the Hall of Fame. It's starting to get to that point where this generation from the early 2000s to the late 2010s are going away, and we're going to that new generation, and that old generation is ending with LeBron, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry. And eventually, in a couple of years, all those guys are going to be retired. So we're really getting into a new era here in the NBA. And it's just rough to see because all of these guys, amazing careers, legends, and for going back to Rajon Rondo, will and should deservingly be so in the Hall of Fame, that 2-time champion, that bad you-know-what on the defensive side of the ball, one of the best passers to ever do it. Rajon Rondo, legend. Congrats on his retirement. But let's move on to the Milwaukee Bucks, because for how this season has been going for the Milwaukee Bucks, it's really, really just shocking. Absolutely shocking. They lost to Miami in 5 last year. We all know the story. They lost to Miami in 5 last year. They hired Adrian Griffin, 30-11. They fired Adrian Griffin. Doc Rivers now in there. He is 15-15 for this Milwaukee Bucks team with their current record of 47-29. Excuse me, 18-18, if I'm not mistaken. Now they're at 47-29. This Milwaukee Bucks team has been really inconsistent with Doc Rivers at the helm. Really had that rough start, and now have lost 2 really brutal games to the Washington Wizards and then coming back 2 days later and losing a home game to the Memphis Grizzlies. No offense to those teams, not less offense to Memphis because they're taking a gap year and they haven't been healthy and they're playing a bunch of guys who were in the G League or at the bottom of their roster, but the Washington Wizards as well. And those are just two brutal losses to have at the end of the season. And what's most important is they're leaving the door open for other teams to potentially steal that second seed from them, which obviously the second seed is vital when you're looking at the second round. Who has home court advantage in the second round? That second seed is very, very vital in the playoffs. And Milwaukee, from the way they've been playing this season, is going to need every single advantage they can possibly get. And it's really just been an inconsistency on the defensive side of the ball for this Milwaukee Bucks team. And it's really hard to understand what the problems are for this Milwaukee Bucks team, because when they got Damian Lillard with Giannis, we know it was amazing. We all thought it was going to be amazing, but it really hasn't been that for the Milwaukee Bucks. Even though they are the second seed, they're still like 13 games back from Boston, the first seed. There's a major gap between them. So they're a relatively weak second seed from what we've seen in previous years. And they obviously, as I just said, they could potentially drop. And even though we didn't expect problems, the problem that I think the Milwaukee Bucks have really had this season is honestly that Chris Middleton hasn't just really played that consistent for this Milwaukee Bucks team. And ultimately, I'm going to go out and say this. I don't think anybody's really said this at all in the sports media world, but did Milwaukee trade the wrong player to Portland? I think Milwaukee should have traded Chris Middleton to Portland. You could have gotten away with trading Chris Middleton to Portland because Milwaukee knows, and I think the rest of the league know, I think most people know that Chris Middleton has had knee issues. Why not trade Chris Middleton and keep the defense of Jrue Holiday? Would it have been that big of a deal if you would have traded Chris Middleton? I understand you're trading a guard for a guard here, but you could have made it work. You could have had Dame and Holiday. You could have had Malik Beasley or Jay Crowder starting at the small forward. You could have had Giannis and Brook Lopez. That could have absolutely worked out for the Milwaukee Bucks team. And the way Chris Middleton has been playing, it's just not going to cut it in the playoffs. He's had the knee issues, and he really hasn't looked like that Chris Middleton that we saw in the 2021 playoffs, the year they won the title, where Giannis was saying, no, I'm not going to take the last shot. I'm not going to take the ball up during crunch time. Here, Chris Middleton, take us, lead us. That is not the Chris Middleton we have been seeing of late, and I think that is the problem for Milwaukee. I think they traded the wrong person to Portland, and I think if they would have traded Chris Middleton right now, Jrue Holiday would have been a much better situation for this Milwaukee Bucks team, because looking at the defensive issues they've had this season, looking at what Chris Middleton has not provided for the Milwaukee Bucks team, and looking at that potential pairing for Dame and Jrue Holiday. I know Dame tries to act like a true point guard, but they could run him on what the Golden State offense, where Curry comes off the screens, does slot cuts to the rim, and does the pick and roll with Giannis and gives it to Giannis. And if players are doubling Dame, you can't double Dame, because then he'll just feed the ball to Giannis, and then you've got Holiday in the corner. Or you could reverse that. Holiday could bring the ball up. You've got Giannis. If they double Holiday because he's such a big threat at the point guard, give the ball to Giannis. Giannis collapses the defense. Dame can be there for the three-point shot. So honestly, Chris Middleton is the problem for this Bucks team. And if Chris Middleton does not start playing to the way that we know Chris Middleton can play, there's a problem for Milwaukee, and they will probably have to consider trading Chris Middleton this offseason. They probably made a major mistake in not trading Chris Middleton instead of Jrue Holiday. Maybe they had to throw in another guy like AJ Green. Would have been worth it to keep Jrue Holiday the way Jrue Holiday impacted this Milwaukee Bucks team on the defensive side of the ball. Because clearly all season long, no shots at Damian Lillard, but we have seen the difference with this Milwaukee Bucks team on the defensive side of the ball. We have seen the difference. It's been terrible. And Drew Holiday is the best perimeter defender in the NBA. And it's been terrible without him. And Middleton's only averaging 15 a game. Holiday can average 15 a game with the defense that Chris Middleton would not be able to provide for this Milwaukee Bucks team. So ultimately, that's why the Milwaukee Bucks have been suffering this season. Honestly, Adrian Griffin, probably not the best hire considering that the Milwaukee Bucks are a championship contender. You're hiring this first-year head coach. Probably not the best move, not the best look for the Milwaukee Bucks. Probably made a mistake there. Should they have fired him? Maybe it was a little early. Maybe they should have gave him the season. But honestly, it's not even the coaching. It is Chris Middleton. I'm putting the pressure on Chris Middleton because if Chris Middleton does not perform this postseason, we've got major problems in Milwaukee, and he should be traded. That's it. That's my take on it. I don't think anybody's really talking about that. And people should be, because this is the reason why Milwaukee's suffering right there, right here, and right there. And I just quite frankly don't understand. I really don't understand, like, what's the problem here? Because, like, he's been so inconsistent this season. He's had 7, 12, 21, 24. He's got to get to that consistent Chris Middleton where we know he can put up 25 points per game on any given night and be the guy who you can give the ball to in crunch time. Because if we don't get that Chris Middleton, Milwaukee's going home early, and Milwaukee's going home in disappointing fashion. And speaking of a team that could jump them and could send them home in disappointing fashion, the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic have two crucial games against the Milwaukee Bucks. As I said, the Milwaukee Bucks are currently second in the East, 47-29. The Magic are fourth in the East at 45-31. They are 2 games behind the Milwaukee Bucks. But as I just mentioned, the Orlando Magic still have 2 opportunities to play the Milwaukee Bucks this season, one in Milwaukee and one in Orlando. If the Magic win both of those, they would get the tiebreaker because the series is currently tied at 1-1. The Magic would jump the Bucks. If the Bucks win one of the 2 games, the Bucks probably solidify themselves ahead of Orlando, probably solidifying themselves as that 2 seed and getting that crucial home court advantage in the second round. But if Orlando finds a way to steal this first one in Milwaukee, they get that last game in the regular season against Milwaukee in Orlando. That could potentially be a dangerous spot for the Milwaukee Bucks and potentially dropping a seed ladder, potentially 2, looking at the way how tightly compacted this Eastern Conference is. Because by Milwaukee losing those 2 games to Washington and Memphis, they are opening the door now for these other teams. They had a smooth 4 or 5 game cushion, but now with these 2 losses and these teams in the Eastern Conference starting to win a little bit more, there has been this cushion in the Eastern Conference, and this cushion that Milwaukee had, it's gone. It's gone. And now teams like Orlando are now going to have the opportunity to play this Milwaukee Bucks team. And if Milwaukee slips up, they drop down the standings, and there are only going to be more questions surrounding this Milwaukee Bucks team. But let's get away from Milwaukee and go to the Orlando aspect on this. You got to give props to Orlando. We've talked about them a lot in the past couple of episodes. But again, Orlando, like the other night, I watched the Magic play the Pelicans last night. Dominated finish to finish in New Orleans. And New Orleans has played absolutely solid this season. Even though, like, the Magic have had a relatively easy schedule this end of the season, so maybe we're saying that's why they've been winning a lot. But they really just showed it the other night against the Pelicans, dominating them from finish to finish. This Magic team has been very, very solid and very, very solid on the defensive side of the ball. Banchero has been playing like an absolute all-star. Franz Wagner playing like a borderline all-star. They've got the guards, Suggs, Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony, who any 3 of those can give you 20 points on any given night. So Orlando is on the rise, baby. And Orlando could still get that 2 seed. And that would be very interesting if we got like a 2-7 Philadelphia-Orlando or a Philadelphia or a Orlando-Miami match, like Orlando-Miami matchup. Like, who would be favorites in those series? I have no idea. But that would be intriguing. But this could get very interesting down the stretch if the Magic were to upset the Bucks in Milwaukee. Obviously, we know Damian Lillard's out right now for couple of games, but there's still no excuse to lose to the Wizards or Grizzlies. And when he comes back, we expect them to beat every single team for the rest of the season, because except from potentially maybe Boston, but probably still Boston, because Boston will probably be resting their players because they are going to be the first seed, locked up the first seed, only a couple games left. So they should probably win all their games for the rest of the season, the Bucks. And if they slip that one up against Orlando, the pressure is going to rise for Milwaukee. And what we've seen in the past few years with Milwaukee being under pressure, they have not lived up to it. Blowing leads in the playoffs, blowing leads in regular seasons, giving up 140 points in a lot of games this season. The pressure is on Milwaukee, and they are going to have to stick up to the task and execute and get past that pressure. And as I said, part of that's Chris Middleton. Part of that's just getting the business done and finding ways to win. I don't even think it's a coaching aspect. I think if this Milwaukee team needs to regroup, needs to figure out their crap, because this Milwaukee Bucks team is capable of getting out of the East. If they play the way that we know all of those players can play, I believe they are capable of upsetting Boston and getting out of the East, because I trust Giannis in the postseason. For what he's done other than that championship year, I still trust him in the postseason. I trust Damian Lillard in the postseason. Milwaukee's got to regroup and figure this out now, because the pressure is rising, and when pressure rises, the games start getting a little bit tighter. The fans start getting a little bit jumpy. It's all on you, and it's very hard to perform under pressure. So this is very interesting down the storyline, this Magic Milwaukee 2-game stretch. Now let's move on to another crucial game here at the end of the season for the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. The Miami Heat coming off a huge loss to Philadelphia, which ended basically having any cushion in that 6 through 8 spots. They're only separated by a game. Indy, Miami, Philly. Miami now goes to Indiana in what will be a huge game and will determine for the present who will be the 6th seed. That game is going to be this Sunday in Indiana. Series tied 1-1. Winner essentially gets a 2-game cushion, because you not only get the 1-game advantage over the other team, you also get that tiebreaker. So even if you're tied, you still have the advantage over the other team. So these are huge. This is a huge game for both teams, and both teams really, really need this game. But as of late, Halliburton has not played up to par as he did before his injury. And Miami has been up and down this season, so it's very intriguing. It's like, who wants it more? Who is going to want it more? It's going to be a hostile environment for Miami, but they played, honestly, surprisingly, relatively better on the road than they played at home this season. But it's going to be a test for both Indiana and both Miami. Miami, we know what in crucial games like this one, we know they rise up to the occasion. I know they had they had a rough one against Philadelphia, but they got off to a very rough start, and they really couldn't recover from that. But this is a huge game for both teams, because not only do you get that 6th seed and get the week's rest from the play-in, you potentially get, as I said at the beginning, one of those 3 teams, Orlando, Cleveland, New York, in the first round. And those, for both of those teams, are winnable playoff series. And it's just so important for both of these teams. And both of these teams have had really up and down seasons. And this game, honestly, for both teams, probably more Miami than Indiana, because Miami is expected more of in the postseason. This one game could potentially define both of these teams' seasons. I know it's like that's how we do it these days in sports media. The sports fans do it. They define things by one game, but that's how it's going to be. This game is going to define both of these teams' seasons, and they both really need it. And after that game that they play against each other, both teams relatively have easy schedules down the stretch. So probably whoever wins that game is probably going to be that 6th seed ultimately, unless Philadelphia runs the table, which is obviously possible, as we discussed earlier in the show. But for right now, it's Indy, Miami. That one game is going to determine, most like probably give it like 60-70% chance who will be in the play-in and who will get the week's rest and get that 6th seed for the playoffs. Very interesting game. Very different, very unique matchup, as we got Indiana, who's this high-powered, dominating offense, historic offensive team, against a Miami team who more focuses on the defensive side of the ball and has shown their inconsistencies this season on offense. So which team's going to fold, and which team's going to step up on their respective weaknesses on the side of the ball? Miami, could they step up on the offensive side of the ball? Could Indiana step up on the defensive side of the ball? We don't know, but the matchup, very intriguing. Hopefully Miles Turner gets healthy for that one, because we want to see both of these teams at full strength. Probably not for Miami. We're going to see them at full strength. Obviously, Tyler Hero has been having his issues, But for the relatively for both teams, we want to see them at full strength. And that's probably with the exception of Tyler Hero, what we are going to get in that huge game there in Indiana. So that will be a very, very exciting game to watch this weekend. Another exciting thing is the Western Conference. We thought New Orleans had the 5 seed locked up, and all of a sudden they go downhill just like that. Dallas in the conversation now at the 5 seed, Phoenix at the 6 seed, the Pelicans dropped to the 7 seed, but even though that is the case, the Pelicans still have a chance to revive what has been going on here. They have lost 3 straight against Phoenix, Boston, and Orlando, but they still have 2 huge games this season against what is 2 teams that are very close to them in the standings. The 6th seed, Phoenix, who they are tied with, and the 8th seed, Sacramento, who they have a game lead over. If New Orleans were to win both of those games, they will most likely be out of the play-in and into the playoffs, potentially getting that matchup against OKC. And for how good OKC's been, we never really see them in the postseason. So that for New Orleans, that could potentially be a winnable series. But if New Orleans loses both those games, they now drop to the 8th seed. They now open the door for the Lakers to jump ahead of them, and they could potentially drop to the 9th seed. And the way the Warriors have been playing, winning 6 straight games, it could be a disaster for New Orleans, potentially dropping to the 10th seed, worst case scenario for the Pelicans. So this is really a really crucial stretch to potentially save what's been going on these past few games, because the West is just that tight, where you cannot afford a major losing streak, because those teams behind you, those teams in front of you, the teams in front of you are going to separate, and the teams behind you are going to inch closer and closer and closer to you, and eventually they're going to get ahead of you, which is what teams like Phoenix and Dallas have been doing the past few games. So for New Orleans, this is a really crucial stretch to revive their season. But let's move on to Phoenix's perspective here. Phoenix obviously tied with New Orleans. Huge game for them. Obviously, they've had their ups and downs this season. Still 14 games over 500 in the 6th seed, which is absolutely incredible when you think about it. But they've had their ups and downs. Bradley Beal hasn't been healthy all season. Now they finally have the opportunity to have their team at full strength going into the postseason. What can they do? What can they show against a New Orleans team? They're hosting New Orleans. Oh, by the way, both these games in New Orleans, at Phoenix, at Sacramento, they're both on the road. What can Phoenix show against this New Orleans team? Grab that game of separation, potentially get the tiebreaker over the New Orleans Pelicans, which is an essential 2-game separation there, which could potentially, at the end of the day, solidify Phoenix into the postseason. So that's a huge game for Phoenix. And if they can do that, if they, again, play OKC, who looks trending toward the 3 seed now with their 2-game losing streak, that's a winnable series. They play Minnesota in the second round. That's a winnable series. Phoenix can get to the conference finals. That's what's crazy about the West. For how inconsistent some of these teams have been, there are still major opportunities for these teams to revive their season. And we'll get into some more of those teams in a second. But Phoenix can really revive their season with a win here against New Orleans, and with wins going down the end of the season. They could potentially get up to the 5th seed. They have the toughest. The problem is they do have the toughest schedule for the rest of the season, but they do have the opportunities to sneak up on the Clippers as well. They have 2 games against the Clippers, and they are only 2.5 games behind the Clippers. So if they win both those games, they could potentially get home court in the first round. For how bad Phoenix has been playing, they are not out of the question of getting the 4 seed in home court in that first round of the playoffs. They still got to play the Timberwolves twice, and they've got to play the Kings, which is also another huge game for them, close to them in the standings. And then they've got the Pelicans, as we are mentioning. So Phoenix, this is an also very important stretch for them as well. And now and then moving on to Sacramento. Also, Sacramento has really been a little bit off everybody's radars this season after becoming the 3 seed in the Western Conference. Give it or leave it, the West was a lot weaker last year. Sacramento has dropped to the 8th seed and are potentially in danger of dropping to the 9 or the potential 10 seed here is what we're looking at here. Only having a half-game cushion against the Lakers, a 2-game cushion against the Warriors. If the Sacramento Kings start losing some games here at the end of the season, where they play at Boston next, They play at OKC. They play the Pelicans. They play the Suns. If they start losing some of those games, they could potentially drop to the 10 seed, just like New Orleans. So for all of these teams, very, very crucial stretches. And I love it. I absolutely love it how they're all playing at the end of the season. All three of them are playing each other at the end of the season, which is absolutely incredible because we love to see those seeding races at the end of the season. It's still unpredictable. By this time last year, we were already like saying, oh, let's preview this Cleveland Knicks series we got in the East. Let's preview this play-in game that we're solidified to have. But all of a sudden, we have no idea what the playoff matchups are going to be. We still don't know who's going to have home court anywhere, either in the East or in the West, and especially in the Western Conference. So it is crucial for all these teams to get wins. But Sacramento's really been off the radar. They've been, just like last year, brutal on the defensive end, but they haven't played as well as they have on the offensive side of the ball as they did last year. And Harris and Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk have had significant injuries to both of them. So those are huge two rotation pieces that are gone for Sacramento. So this could go very downhill for Sacramento if they don't win some games. Ultimately, if I had to pick one of those three teams to be the one to probably suffer, it's probably going to be Sacramento because of the injuries they suffered and what I've seen from them this season and what the other two teams I've seen from the season. And I trust them more than the Sacramento Kings this season. No offense to Sacramento but I'm more of a defensive guy, and I think Sacramento ultimately just doesn't have the defense. I don't think they have the interior defense to guard some of those big guys, like guard Zion, or just the defense in general to guard a highly elite offensive team like the Phoenix Suns. So ultimately, if I had to pick a team to probably be the odd man out here, it's probably going to be the Kings. And this could create interesting storylines going down the play-in matchup. Because remember, 8th seed, even though 7 through 10 is now the play-in, that 8th seed for Sacramento, and mentioning the other teams as well, for Phoenix, for the Pelicans as well, that 7 or 8 seed is way more important than people seem to think. Because that 7 and 8 seed give you a guaranteed 2 games. So even if you lose the first, you still get another chance to save your season. But if you're in the 9-10 game, it's win or go home for both games. But you get that 1 game cushion if you're the 7 or 8, and you can afford to lose 1 game and still have the opportunity to host a game to save your season. So very interesting stuff down the stretch here in the Western Conference. It is, when we get next week, the standings are going to be completely shifted, and it's going to be like completely different storylines at the end of the season, and different games are going to matter more. And that's just how the NBA has been going this season, especially in the Western Conference. And continuing with that, the Los Angeles Lakers are playing the Golden State Warriors this week, and they try to solidify themselves as a top 9 seed in the Western Conference guaranteed, which is crucial to be the 9 seed, even though they still have to play 2 games to get into the playoffs. They now host the Warriors rather than be on the road in what would be a win or go home game against them. But if the Lakers were to beat the Warriors, they would essentially give themselves a 3-game cushion against the Golden State Warriors. And ultimately, that would probably about do it for Golden State, pretty much solidifying them as the number 10 seed and pushing the Lakers a little bit closer to that 8-7. As I just mentioned, you get 2 guaranteed games rather than 1. So that's pretty crucial for them. So the Lakers, if they keep winning, they're on a 3-game winning streak. They've played solid as of late, but so have the Warriors. So that would be a very crucial game down the stretch. And if the Warriors win that game, though, against the Lakers, the Warriors now are only trailing half a game. Plus, the Warriors would have the tiebreaker against the Los Angeles Lakers. So essentially, I'm not going to say this, but this is probably who's probably going to be the 9 seed. Because if the Lakers slip here against the Warriors, they will probably be in that 9-10 game guaranteed. The Warriors probably in that 9-10 game guaranteed already, but could potentially be hosting that game rather than being on the road if they win that. And this could put the Lakers in a very, very interesting scenario. What will LeBron do if they get the 10 seed and lose in the first playing game? Who knows? But that creates an interesting storyline going down the rest of the season. This Western Conference, just absolutely ballistic. And this matchup just shows it as well. Like, anything can happen here. But the Warriors currently, right now, as I'm looking at it, they beat the Rockets now, so that pretty much the Rockets are out of the conversation now. So the Warriors now got to focus on beating the Lakers And if they can do that, they can potentially save their season and have an opportunity to play in a win-or-go-home game to make it to the playoffs and potentially get a matchup of, who knows, maybe the Timberwolves. So you never know right there. You never know who you could play as the 8th seed, especially in this tightly stacked Western Conference, and you never know what's going to happen, because look what we saw last year with the Miami Heat, 8th seed all the way to the finals, just like we never know what's going to happen. And this play-in tournament makes things very, very intriguing, and that's what I absolutely love about it. So that's that. And then, again, we're just talking about the middle of the Western Conference right now. We're talking about that 6 through 10 slot. Let's talk about the 1 and the 1 seed spot. The Minnesota Timberwolves host Denver in a battle for the top seed. The Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets, 53-23 apiece. Currently, the Timberwolves lead that season series 2-1. But even if Denver does win this game and ties the season series at 2-2, Minnesota will still have the tiebreaker due to conference record. But that would still give Denver a essential 1-game cushion against Minnesota, which very important. But if Minnesota were to win this one, they'd essentially have a 2-game cushion against the Denver Nuggets, and most likely Minnesota would solidify themselves as the number 1 seed. Minnesota has played shockingly incredible without the services of Karl-Anthony Towns for a very long time here for the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's been absolutely insane to see them still play consistent, still be in that race for the number 1 seed. They got a tough schedule going down the stretch where they play Phoenix, the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the Phoenix again going down the stretch here. But if Minnesota can beat Denver there, get a 2-game cushion against Denver, that's their third to last game of the season. With 2 games to go, all they got to do is win out. If Minnesota wins that game, and all they got to do is win one. All they got to do is not lose and be either Atlanta or Phoenix one of their last games. And they essentially get the 1 seed. So, but if Denver gets there, what would be interesting if Denver gets there is that Minnesota would still be in the race essentially, but Denver going down the stretch after that Timberwolves game has the Spurs and the Grizzlies. So those are easily 2 winnable games for the Denver Nuggets. So what I'm trying to say here is essentially this game right here, the third to last game for both these teams in the regular season, will decide who the West runs through, who will get home court advantage in the West throughout the postseason. This will be the game of the season in the Western Conference. This will be the game to watch. It's just absolutely mind-blowing how close not only the middle of the Western Conferences, but the top of the Western Conferences as well. But don't forget about OKC. Even though they are behind a game here, they're still not out of it either, because if I'm not mistaken, I think they have tiebreakers against both of those teams. So don't forget about OKC. But so far, looking at OKC, Shea being out for a little bit, that's the game right there. Minnesota, Denver for the West number 1 seed. So we've got a very, very interesting storylines, not only in the Western Conference, but the Eastern Conference going down the stretch. Huge games for playoff positioning. We had a lot in the show. It was incredible to do, but that is all the time we have for our second to last show before the play-in tournament starts. And thank you so much for watching the show. And remember, please follow on Instagram at take_your_shot_podcast_. That's at take_your_shot_podcast_. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much. And that's all my shots for the week. See you next time, folks.